leagues, which is even more important than the number of people who join us tonight. We just try and get this information out to everyone. So thank you so much for joining us. Give it one more minute, guys.
Did I see my friend Judy?
You did, Joyce. I was waving to you.
I didn't see you. Hi.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Lisa.
Hi, Judy.
Oh, Lisa.
Hi, Barbara.
Hi, Joyce. Is that a glass of wine behind you, Joyce?
Oh my God, yes. What story.
Oh my gosh, I wish I had one.
Okay, guys, I'm at 7:04, and you know me, I like to get this going, especially when we're talking about evening. So for those of you who have joined us, again, I am Laura Bierman. I am the Executive Director of the League of Women Voters. Also on the Zoom tonight is Jennifer Wilson, who is marked as Laura Bierman. So that's very confusing to you, but most of you know Jennifer. She's down at the bottom. Maybe Jennifer, you could wave so everyone can see you. She is our Deputy Director of the State League. The account is under my name, which is why my name shows up for her. So don't be confused. There's not two Lauras here. There's Laura and Jennifer, which is basically our state staff. I'm so excited that you all were willing to join tonight. I think this is very exciting for us. I know many of you have told me already that you're working with organizations that interact or serve people with disabilities, which I think is wonderful, and we're very excited to hear that. But we thought tonight what we wanted to do is just kind of talk generally about interacting or best practices for interacting with people with disabilities. As a teaser, I did tell you that we are working on a contract. It's not quite finalized yet, but I'm 99% sure we will have it, where we will be providing stipends to all of you or to local leagues who are willing to work with organizations serving people with disabilities. And some of that will be similar to the organ donation grant that we had a while ago. That if you do this, you will get this much money. If you do that, you get some more money. But again, it will be stipends to support the local leagues in their efforts and try and be an inducement for you to reach out to communities that may not be communities you usually work with. So we're not going to get into that detail tonight. We will be sending you all that information shortly, but we thought in the meantime, let's start the conversation. So we have two people on with us tonight. Helen Charland is an advocate with the Disability Rights New York. She's waving there. And she's going to present the program tonight.
Shirley or?
Helen Charland is her name. And
okay.
Kevin Greenstein is also on tonight. Kevin, if you want to give a little wave. Kevin is an individual with disabilities, but even more importantly, he's a league member from the Port Washington Manhasset League. So thank you, Kevin, for helping with this tonight, because you totally understand what the league does and hopefully can give a different perspective to us on this. Jennifer is going to be monitoring the chat function. So those of you at the bottom, if you want to chat and pose a question, we ask, let's not interrupt the presentation, put it in the chat room, or we will have questions and answers at the end. But for now, let's try and allow Helen and Kevin to do the full presentation. So Jennifer, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, the only thing I'll add is because we definitely do want to give the presenters all of our attention. So we ask that you guys all mute yourselves. And if you don't mute yourself, and I notice that your little avatar is green because you're making noise, I'll mute you, but you can unmute yourself if you want to talk, or you can raise your hand after they're done presenting. So just so you're not surprised if you're trying to speak and no one can hear you, it's because I muted you.
The mute button, if you're on a PC, is down in the bottom left. And Jennifer, correct me if they're on an iPad, it's in the top right, or if they're on a Mac, or I know there's a difference.
Yep, you should be able to see it if you just hover your cursor over yourself. Usually the mute will pop right up and you can just click it.
Okay, everybody's good? All right, well then, Helen, it is.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, it sounded like you were in the middle of saying something, and when I hit unmute, all of a sudden you went quiet. So let's see. Can everyone see my screen? Like a thumbs up? I see some head nods. Okay, great. My name is Helen Charland. I'm a voting rights advocate at Disability Rights New York. Laura gave a pretty good overview of who I am, so I'm just going to jump right into it and tell you a little bit about the organization that I work for. So if you don't know, Disability Rights New York is the protection and advocacy agency for New York State. So we are designated by the governor to provide free legal and advocacy services to people with disabilities when they have a legal issue that directly relates to their disability. I specifically work for the voting access and assistive technology programs. DRNY has 9 programs that vary depending on, it may be disability specific or issue specific. So like I said, the assistive technology program specifically works when people have an issue related to AT. And we also have a developmental disability program, a mental illness program. So that's just a little background on us. And the first thing I'm going to jump into is talking about the accessible voting machines used in New York State, which is called the ballot marking devices. They were established by HAVA back in, oh gosh, I'm going to get it wrong, 2001, 2002, that required that all states have an accessible voting machine that allowed individuals with disabilities to privately and independently mark their ballot. Now, HAVA actually only covers federal elections, but in New York State, most counties use these machines for all elections because they still need to be compliant with the ADA, and so generally they will use the ballot marking devices for all elections. Anyone, disability or not, is able to use the machine. I personally find it way simpler to use the BMD because it lays the ballot out in a way that makes sense. I know that I'm not going to accidentally mark twice on a ballot and then have it not count correctly. And if you are not familiar with the ballot marking devices, I highly encourage you. You can either contact me after this training and I can have a more in-depth conversation with you on the machine, or contacting your Board of Elections to learn more about them because they are an amazing tool. And when I get to my portion with Kevin, he may have a little bit to say on them too, because he is a big advocate for the BMDs as well. Kevin, is there anything that you would like to add on them right now?
I think I gave testimony because I was opposed to it.
You were, until you learned how to use them, correct?
Yes, I was opposed to a test, and I gave testimony enough at that wrapping machines. So we only were non-partisan elections and help increase using them for partisan elections.
That's correct. So back when we still had lever voting machines and there was kind of an in-between of when the BMDs were actually going to be at the polling places and when they weren't going to be there, Kevin advocated for the lever voting machines, and then he switched and he now is a staunch advocate for the ballot marking devices. So there's actually three different ballot marking devices used in New York State. So as you can see, the AutoMark is used in Albany, Schenectady, Erie, Rockland, New York City, and Nassau counties. And then all the other counties in New York State use a version of the Dominion device. So the old device is called the Dominion ImageCast. but recently within the last year or so, the ImageCast Evolution was certified by New York State. Now, counties weren't given funding to purchase these upgraded machines, so a lot of counties still use the ImageCast version, and some, like I know Rensselaer County, they purchased a few of the Evolution devices. So if you're in one of the all other counties that uses Dominion, it may be ImageCast, it may be Evolution, and that's another thing that would be good to speak with your county board of elections about, to figure out if you which specific Dominion devices are used in your counties. And now there also are some alternative accessible voting options. Now, these don't necessarily make for a private or independent vote, but a person has the choice. If they want, they can have their ballot filled out with the assistance of a trusted person, so long as it's not their boss or an agent of their union. They can also get help from a poll worker. I'm sure you guys know, if someone requests assistance from a poll worker, they have a poll worker, one from the Democratic Party, one from the Republican Party, go to help the person mark their ballot, so there's some accountability there. And then also they may use an absentee ballot. And I forgot to start this presentation at the beginning. I apologize. I do have a dog, so if you randomly hear some barking, he just came into the room, so he just made me think of that. Okay, so now I thought it would be nice to do a little interview with Kevin, because he is a self-advocate. He's a league member. He's very politically active and active in civics. He was awarded the Self-Advocate of the Year for exemplary advocacy in 2018. As it says here, he helped the passage of early voting in 2019. And so I'm just going to ask him a couple of questions. And if you have any questions for him or me throughout this interview, drop them in the chat box and we'll be able to get to them at the end. How you doing, Kevin?
Hi,
So,
I'm Kevin Greenstein. My whole advocacy journey started with me being segregated.
right. So what got you interested in civics and politics?
I got interested in politics by having good parents.
Yeah, you had mentioned that to me, that your parents are pretty politically active, and so that's how you got involved. And how did you learn about different things related to civics and politics?
Partners in policy making, which is a efficient global program.
Right. And I know, so Partners in Policy Making, from what I understand, it's a program that supports individuals with developmental disabilities to get
in
them
the U.S. and overseas.
in the U.S., overseas. I think it started in Michigan. I could be wrong.
Minnesota, state of Minnesota.
Minnesota. I knew it was an M state. And at the time, so what it does is it helps people with developmental disabilities and other disabilities get involved in civics and politics. It really promotes self-advocacy. And at the time when Kevin was a part of that program, he was the youngest ever student and graduate, which is pretty.
And now we're even younger people.
Now there's younger people, but at the time you were the youngest, so you started the trend.
And then as of 2019, it became a deficient program in New York.
Became a what program?
Deficient program. Yes.
Division program. Nice.
Because it's sort of like it has offer managed care.
Right.
It was this funding, deficient funding to a managed care.
Through managed care. Interesting. I didn't know that. So just a couple more questions for you, Kevin. What can the League of Women Voters do to support voters with disabilities?
Our raffles right national, state, and county and town, well, city and fields, our raffles have definitely got out and fought.
Help people with disabilities get out and vote. Yeah.
Yes, and as we read from a national raffle all the way down.
So you're saying it starts at the top, national level, and works all the way down.
Yes, and this represents the state.
Yeah, the league that's on right now does represent the state. And I know that before Kevin and I had this conversation, he sent me a really nice, pretty much essay. And in it, he said one way that the league can support voters with disabilities is to help them build relationships with elected officials, help with introductions, and then also help them get started with advocacy work. Is that right, Kevin?
Yes.
Great. And so then the last question I have for you is there one thing that you would like the League of Women Voters to know about voters with disabilities?
I think like everyone else, we read the phone voters should respect us, especially during the time of not crisis.
Right. Respecting you?
Well, I had to tell us to be sedated and not being intruded.
Right. Anything else?
I think we should have more inclusion for people with disabilities in the voting process.
It feels intrusive?
Yes, if inclusive.
Gotcha.
To have a vote, but in times of crisis, we feel sedated.
Great. And I know a couple of other things you put in your essay to me. You said that by inviting people with disabilities to join the league will become more aware of issues that impact people with disabilities. And I know there's a couple issues that are important to you. Would you like to share them?
Yes. I like people, I think they should support the Medicaid funding.
Medicaid funding.
And Medicare.
Medicaid, Medicare. I know you talked about housing and employment for people with disabilities. And then
twice a season, right, we remind us to, even though a document tells us to be segregated, we still to be included.
Right. And then my favorite part of your essay was, you said, and I quoted this when we spoke last week, was, by getting involved, we can all make a difference. So everyone working together really is the key here. Kevin, thank you so much for your time. I'm gonna, if you're able to stay on the meeting, that'd be great, because if people have questions at the end, they may have them for you or for me. So thank you so much. And just to a little bit of a recap, some of the highlights: by inviting people with disabilities into the league, members become more aware of disability related issues. It gets on the radar of our political officials. The League of Women Voters can support voters with disabilities by helping them build relationships with elected officials. And like I said, my favorite quote, by getting involved, we all can make a difference. We can all make a difference. So now getting into, I guess, the meat and potatoes of what the training was intended to be. And it was sensitivity considerations when assisting voters with disabilities. There are so many, you could go on for hours and hours and hours. So I'm just going to hit some of the top ones, but really what it boils down to is a little picture on the side. Golden rule: treat others the way you want to be treated. Speak to others the way you want to be spoken to. If you are a 26-year-old woman, I want to be spoken to like a 26-year-old woman, regardless of if I have a disability or not. Never assume that someone is uninterested in voting or is unable to vote. So in New York State, the guardianship status alone doesn't determine whether or not someone has the capacity to vote. There has to be this whole other separate court proceeding. They need to be I always get the word wrong. A judge needs to deem them incompetent to vote. One instance that I think of is I always see the League of Women Voters. I live in the Albany area at our local farmers market. And if you do similar activities in a post-COVID world, if someone comes up to your table and they have a teen with them or a young adult who has a disability, ask them if they're registered to vote. Ask them directly if they're interested. It may not be a conversation that their parents would necessarily think to have. Kevin is lucky because his parents are politically active and they have those conversations, but not everyone may be doing that. Another simple one that's important to work into everyday life is person first language. It's not a disabled person. It is a person with a disability. It is a voter with a disability, because before their disability, before any of that, they are a person. They are a voter. Be respectful, very obvious one. Speak to the person, not their support staff. So if someone comes up to your table, say a person with a disability is the one to approach the table and they have support staff with them, talk to the person who approached. There's no need to speak through their support staff and say, oh, do you think that he would be interested in this, when they're standing right there. It goes back to treating others the way you want to be treated. People want to be spoken to directly, not through another person. People want to be able to speak for themselves. Patience. Don't be afraid to ask for clarification. One thing that comes to mind is if someone has speech difficulty. If you're helping someone register to vote and you're helping them fill out a form and they may have some sort of speech impediment and you don't understand what they said, ask again, because especially when it comes to an important form, you want to make sure you're getting all of the information correct. And when you're having a conversation, you want to know what's being said. In order to respond, you need to know what was said. Voters may need additional support, but ask before you help. One thing that comes to mind is if a voter is, or potential voter is blind or has a visual disability, maybe they need help filling out the form because they cannot see it. But before just taking the form and starting to fill it out, ask them, hey, would you like me to fill out this form for you? Is there anything I can do to assist you? And that's true regardless of disability. Asking them specifically what they need help with. They know themselves better than anyone else, just like everyone. So they will know what support they need. And service animals, it's so hard because dogs are so cute. And so you want to just look at them and coo and say, oh my gosh, your dog is adorable. But that dog is an extension of the person. So the way I like to frame it and to keep myself in check is the questions or things that I would say about a service dog, would I say to someone about their wheelchair? Because it's the same thing. I wouldn't ask to pet someone's wheelchair. I wouldn't be staring at someone's wheelchair. And that's another big thing with service animals is when you, if a dog is looking at you and you're looking back at them, it's distracting them from what they're doing. And I know for people outside of this phone call, the greater world, they don't know this. And so every time someone is just like looking at a service dog, they're like, oh, you're so cute. And it's distracting them. It's just reinforcing bad things for the dogs. And so it takes people like us to know not to do that. And a lot of times, at least it's been my experience, where if a person has a service dog, you'll hear them say something like, oh, Gallop, come here. And if it's okay, oh, his name is Gallop, and a lot of times they're happy to talk about it. But it's just not something that you initially say, oh my God, your dog is so cute. It's like they want to be, again, going back to speaking to the person, not their support staff. Speak to the person, not to their dog. And I know that's hard as a dog lover, but it's important. And then the bottom link, I'm not going to click on it right now. Maybe I'll send the PowerPoint to Laura and she can send it to everyone who's registered. It's from California, County of Santa Barbara, and it's just a really good list of other things to consider. It goes into more detail if you're working with someone who's blind and you may need to give them directions. Don't say over there by the chair. Give direct, okay, it's on your right hand side, how to guide people who are blind, because again, this is the thing that I've heard from going to many Council of the Blind meetings is, and this is more for poll workers, but it's still just, it's interesting to know, is they said that poll workers will like kind of drag them to where the polling booth is and not realize what they're doing, when the best way is you kind of stick your arm out like this, the person will grab onto your arm and then you just walk. You don't grab the person, they grab you, you lead them, and normally they will have their cane or a dog who understands this gesture. But again, treating others the way you want to be treated. No one wants to be dragged around. Keeping that in mind. And these are a couple other things that I think that this is disability or not, but just most of my work is done with voters with disabilities, is people may be hesitant to enroll in a political party for several reasons. One, just because it's a very politically heated climate, but also they may not understand what it means to enroll in a party. So I guess what the sensitivity consideration would be is don't overestimate what you think someone might know. I guess is the way I would put it. I always like to tell people New York State is a closed primary state. That means you can only vote in the primary of the political party that you're registered for. But that doesn't mean come the general election, you need to vote for the party that you're registered for. And that has been a common misconception that I've heard from registering voters, is they think if they're registered as a Democrat or registered as a Republican, then they need to vote for the Republican candidate, which is not, obviously not the case. So if someone seems hesitant, maybe going into a little bit more detail and explaining what it means. I always provide resources for how to learn, how to get nonpartisan information about political parties. I guess it's kind of hard for it to be nonpartisan because it's a political party, but Ballotpedia, is where I normally refer them to learn more, or I tell them to speak to someone who they trust, a family member, friends, just to learn about the different parties. And then another thing, which I'm sure you guys come across, is, okay, yes, I want to register to vote. You go through the form, you get to the bottom, you say, would you like to enroll in a political party? And they go, I want to be an independent, or I want to be in independence. And I'm like, okay, well, independent is not being enrolled in a party, and the Independence Party is a political party. So just being aware of things that are said, which I'm sure you guys get, that this is not exclusive to voters with disabilities, just keeping those things in mind. And that is all I got. So if you guys have questions, I don't know if people were dropping them in the chat. Please let me know. If Kevin, if any of these questions, if you have anything to add, please unmute yourself and jump in when it feels right.
Is it okay to ask a question right
Oh,
now?
yeah, definitely.
Jody, go
Hi.
ahead.
My name's Jody.
Hi, Jody.
Hi, I'm from Westchester, and I put a question in the side, but I'm concerned about the school board elections with it being vote by mail only. And if there is someone who is blind or has a visual disability, or someone who needs a ballot marking device to vote, how are they going to vote this year for school board elections?
That is the $1 million question. And I cannot, Dear and Wise looking into it. That's really all I can say. If my director, who is an attorney, was on this call, she would be able to give more information. But as it is right now, the way absentee ballots are, there is no accessible way for people who are blind or low vision or have any sort of limited dexterity, aren't able to write, who would traditionally use a sip and puff. They need to get assistance from someone, which is incredibly difficult during a pandemic, because I've spoken to people who are blind and they live alone and they live independently. And so the only way they're able to have their ballot marked is if they go against social distancing guidelines and get assistance from a friend. And they also need to trust the person that's helping them. So that is a huge question, but keep your eyes out, because we are very much looking into that.
If I can just add to that, Helen and Jennifer, one of you, if you could respond. Yes, Jody, it's a huge issue for the school board elections, and we recognize that. But for the June 23rd primary, there was a special, one of the executive orders included something about BMDs available. And if Helen, you or Jennifer could respond to what that accessibility is for the June 23rd primary for people with disabilities, that'd be great.
Yeah, so as it stands right now for June, polling places will still be open, or maybe limitedly, but the ones that are will have an accessible voting machine for people who need it to vote independently. The issue is that, again, the people who do that are putting their right to a private and independent vote above their health or potential health. So it's scary. Like, I've spoken to people who are like, yeah, I know I could go out, but I don't even go to the grocery store. Like, I get my groceries delivered. I'm not going to go and use a voting machine that however many people have touched. And there's cleaning guidelines and stuff on it, but it's just understandably a very weird time.
But I would like to add, if I can, Helen, and I don't know, you may be able to add more to this too, but the National League, for all of you who are on this call, that's why they do not support a total vote by mail. Their position is that we should not, that we need to have vote in person as one option, particularly for people with disabilities. That vote by mail really disenfranchises, especially the blind or the visually impaired, and possibly other people with disabilities. So the National League has called out, and we haven't done that as much because obviously in New York State, we still have early voting, we still have the election day voting. But in some states that are talking about doing all vote by mail, the National League is opposing that, saying that there should be some way for in-person voting as an option as well. So Helen, I don't know if you've heard more about that in your national organization or have anything to add.
Right. It's incredibly complex. DRNY, I don't think I said this at the beginning. I should have. We are nonpartisan, like the league, but we don't take stances on like, okay, no, we're against vote by mail voting or things like that. I'll say that there are ways to have vote by mail accessible to a degree. So like being able to mark your ballot on the computer and then print it out, but then the person would need to be able to put it in an envelope. Just a very, very complex issue is really what it boils down to.
I wanted to say that I'm part of a network that's on, it's an app that you can use on your laptop or your mobile device, and it's called Be My Eyes.
Mm-hmm.
It certainly does take an element of trust and, mutuality but actually this week I did walk someone through their ballot and help them fill it out.
Wow.
I know it. I felt great. It felt great to help someone be able to vote on their own in their house by mail. They were visually impaired, so they had difficulty reading any of the words, but they could in fact see where the circles were. Mm-hmm. So, I just had to tell them the one on the left is for and the one on the right is for, and then they could vote on their own. I didn't have to tell them where to vote. So that was a little bit easier maybe than with someone with full 100% visual impairment. But anyway, it's not the only app that's available. There are other, assistance devices available, but it's a great one because it's full video. Mm-hmm. So, I've also helped people try and figure out their washing machines and some putting television shows up for their kids. So it's been an interesting experience to be part of helping the visually impaired in their normal everyday stuff, which includes voting.
Yeah, that's an amazing app.
Helen, can I ask you another question? And I'm not going to be able to ask this very intelligently, so hopefully you'll understand what I'm trying to get at, because I'm not sure if it was for the visually impaired or for hearing impaired, but there's something about the New York State ballot is not compatible with something that is usually used by people with disabilities to interpret the ballot. Is that enough to get you to understand what I'm asking?
I understand what you're asking. I haven't heard of that because I haven't heard of that, but it's something definitely to look into. It must be like a physical device that they use because New York State doesn't have a computer ballot, and most people who are blind or visually impaired would use screen reader software.
Yeah.
But at this point, New York State doesn't have their ballot on the computer. So unless there's a different sort of device, I haven't heard of that issue.
Jody, you got information? Yeah.
Well, so I've done some work locally in Westchester County with RevUp. And what I've heard from those who are blind in Westchester County is for people who have an older version of the screen reader on their computer, they're not able to see information with when they're trying to register to vote. And
Gotcha.
so their screen reader does not interpret the voter registration form. Therefore, it is not accessible for people who are blind or have visual disabilities. The voter registration form is what I've heard.
Do you know about the ballot, Jody? Have you heard about, I assume the same with the ballot.
Right. Well, so the ballot would be different, right? Because it's coming in the mail or you're going to a location. They're not actually accessing the ballot via their computer. So it wouldn't be a screen reader issue. It's really a matter of what sort of software is being used. And specifically in Westchester County, the county uses older software. And so a lot of the information from the Board of Elections website is not viewable or readable for individuals who have older screen reading software. So it's a real issue because there's no accessibility and no access to information for individuals who have older screen readers.
Yeah.
And it's a simple fix, actually, if the Board of Elections would just change it. But
That's good to know. If they sent me like the people specifically who are having issues sent me an email, I would be happy to talk to them to get more information and possibly do some letter writing advocacy to the boards and see what they can do. And again, during a time of COVID, the world is so different. A lot of the advocacy that my office typically does, we get responses saying we're focused on COVID. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to try.
No, I appreciate that. And that's why we like to, for all of you, this is why we're trying to encourage local leagues to partner with all different organizations, and why, we're so happy to be partnering with Helen and the Disability Rights New York, so that we can work together to try and get these changes that are needed to, enfranchise all voters in New York State.
Yeah. And that actually leads, not to cut you off, but that
No, that's
leads
fine.
to a good question that I saw in the chat was what are good ways to get information to voters with disabilities? And that would be, there's a few organizations. So SANES, which stands for the Self-Advocacy Association for New York State, they have regional offices throughout New York. Oh, I see someone.
Yeah,
Maybe trying to
Michelle's here
slow me
from
down.
Saney's in Long Island.
Oh, okay. I think Sheila is trying to say something, but she's muted.
I just want to ask you to speak slower. I didn't get the acronym. Could you?
Sheila, we'll send out all the links that
Oh,
Helen is
it's in
suggesting
the
and everything
PowerPoint?
now.
Okay.
Yes, but Michelle from Saney's Long Island is with us. Michelle Flood, right?
Yeah, is she on here?
Yeah, she's down a few from you on my Brady Bunch.
I'll type it in the chat box for you. I'll give you my address, my email address, and I can, through that, just contact, I can share it with all my statewide coordinators. Hello to my Long Island friends. I spend a lot of time with Lisa Scott. One of the ways that we educate our men and women is I have Lisa come to our meetings and present the non-biased information on the candidates.
Yep.
She talks to my people about their rights. You cannot ask someone if they're competent to vote.
Mm-hmm.
Just to put that one out there, I saw that in the chat. You can't ask that question. If they're, if you're unsure, if they're not in the register and that kind of thing, allow them to take a provisional ballot home with them and have them vote that way. But I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think that is literally against their rights to ask them that.
Yeah, and that goes, and I guess I didn't hit on it clearly enough in my slide. I said never assume that someone isn't able to vote, isn't interested, isn't competent to vote. And from what I understand, if you're, one, just don't ask, and two, if you help them fill out a voter registration form, that wouldn't be on you guys. The Board of Elections office would do the checks and balances on that to make sure that they're able to be registered. And the same thing goes for the ballot marking device, the accessible voting machines. If you're a poll worker, you can't ask someone, do you have a disability? What's your disability? Anyone can use it. People from my office have gone to use it, and I cringe every time I think of this story. One of our attorneys went out and asked to use it, and the guy goes, "You don't look like you have a handicap." And it was just like, one, words outdated, and two, doesn't matter.
It's
but-
a little like a job interview. You can't ask that in a
Yeah.
job interview. You cannot ask that in an election.
Right.
There's two things I want to bring up here. And one is, for all of you league members, working with Sainies, like Lisa Scott on Suffolk County is already working with Michelle and Sainies. This is what that grant's going to be encouraging you to do. So we'll be reaching out with Michelle and connecting between Helen, Michelle, and the Developmental Disabilities Planning Council, which is who's providing us the funding. We will be providing you funding as stipends and encouragement for you to reach out to these organizations and go and do education and provide demonstrations and work with these so that people who do have disabilities feel comfortable and know how they can vote. And so the second thing I want to say is, since the BMDs have been available, which is like 2009, 2010, something like that, we have in the past encouraged league members, when you go to vote, ask to use it. You know, I have done it many times, and I'm always impressed by the poll workers say, "Oh, no one's used it today. Please, please do. We want to make sure it works." And then I always say, "Come on over with me. I'm not real shy about what my vote is. I understand it's a privacy issue, but instead, I would rather the poll worker be educated on how it works, and I will use it. I will try and go back and change a vote or do different things." And the poll worker is always so intrigued and saying, "Oh, thank you so much. I've always wondered how it worked, really." I mean, they do receive training, but it's different when a voter is actually using it. So again, I encourage all league members to use the ballot marking device. You do not have to have a disability. I did have, Helen, as you said, one person said, "Well, that's only for people with disabilities." And I said, "No, it's not." I said, "I can use it." And the coordinator of this poll site knew that that was okay, but it was the individual poll worker that didn't know that, yeah, anyone can use it. And we encourage you to, because that's the only way we're going to know if those machines are actually working at the poll site.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question, a follow-up to what Helen and Michelle were talking about not asking people whether they're competent? It's kind of the flip side of it. Without sounding partisan, I hope, in the past and now projected for November, a lot of states will have an onslaught of people observing the voters in the polling place and trying to sniff out voter fraud. And in years past, it's been somewhat intimidating to a number of the people there. And I'm just wondering, I mean, how do we protect, or how do you try to plan for people, and well, shall we politely say, with good intentions, like basically questioning whether a person with a disability is competent to vote at the polling place?
I think my gut answer says, if their name's in the poll book, there's no question. It's already been vetted by the State Board of Elections and their county board.
Helen, can I ask you one other question, which is actually the flip side too, that if, because this question has been asked too, if a person with disabilities comes into a poll site with somebody to help them do the usual ballot process, the question is, can that person go and do it with them, or is that considered somebody else filling out the ballot? And we've always said yes, but if you could address that as well, that would be great.
Yeah, so a person, this kind of goes back to the idea of it's an alternative, accessible option to the person, but it just might not be private or dependent. They have the right to bring someone with them, as long as it's not their boss or an agent of their union, which I've never heard of a situation where Actually, I guess a poll worker may ask, okay, you want to bring this person is, who is it? And they could say, it's my friend, it's my dad, whoever. And yeah, that's all right. It's written in election law that that's an okay thing. I see Michelle.
We have, I've gone to a couple of conferences that highlight this, and I can't remember if it came from Rev Up or not, but there obviously, there is legal precedence to have someone come and assist, and we've actually printed up the law. Some of my advocates go and take it with them. And in that stead, if they're really strong advocates, they'll say, look, it is the law. Here it is. I know the conference I went to had just like your league postcard that tells you about your rights, those 5 rights when you walk in, something along that line. If you armed your poll workers with something like that, then it would be kind of a non-starter. I don't know if that's easy to do or not, but on our end, we typically go in armed.
Yeah, and that's very true, and that may be something too that Kevin may be able to speak to, a little bit, because that comes down to self-advocacy, strong self-advocacy skills, and I know he has them, and most of the members of SAMES, at least who I've met, are all very strong. And I go to your guys' conferences and they're like, I'm going to vote and no one's going to tell me I can't. And it's like a rallying cry at the end. It's if you get someone who's a little more shy and a little more introverted, and it's like, oh, I guess I can't. But that comes
really positive. There's positive examples too. I'm well aware of group homes who have gone to their poll for 20 years. The poll workers look forward to them coming, say hello to the group. So it really is just about exposure and inclusion.
Right.
So I originally did post the question because we do a lot of high school registrations, and certainly all the larger high schools, they do have, graduating kids who are 17, 18 years old. They are students with disabilities, and we do schedule time for them to come, with their aid to register to vote. And it gives them a little more time. We can explain things a little more easily when there's not a big crowd of people, et cetera. And there are some of those kids who cannot register to vote. They're not deemed competent, I guess. I haven't really investigated it a lot, but there's usually 2 students to an aide, and there's often one that is not allowed to register and the other one is, and they bring both students, and both students get the spiel, but only one is allowed to register to vote. They may both be 17 or 18 years old, but they both are not at the same level of competency. And my question had more to do with the fact that there's only a few things that prevent someone from being a voter, right? If they're not a citizen, they can't vote. If they're currently serving time or on parole for a felony offense, they can't register to vote. And if they're deemed by a court to be incompetent, then they can't register to vote. And I would want to protect someone who has had that court order from ever coming into a felony offense position, because impersonating a voter is a felony offense. And so I would not, I hear what you're saying, it's not on me, it's on the Board of Elections, but the Board of Elections in Albany County missed a non-citizen who registered to vote by accident.
Yeah.
Right? She thought she could because she had a green card, and, it was ugly. Okay.
Right. No, that's a good point. And I would be, it's so hard because I always err on the side of chances are they can vote, because it needs to be deemed by a court. It's like a whole separate proceeding. So what I might do in that situation is, I don't know, like, I don't have a fact sheet for it, but if you create or have a fact sheet that you can talk about guardianship status and the right to vote and competency, and include that, like send it home with them in their folder with a voter registration form, because then their parents will probably know better than their aide whether or not they're competent or not, or what a judge decided. But that is a tricky stitch.
I have a question about early voting and how the the BMD knows, or how it works for, change in districts and all that kind of thing.
So the way a BMD works at the base level is you're given a ballot. So you're given just a regular ballot like you would to go into a booth with a pen, and you put it into the machine, and the machine then puts it on a screen for you, and it runs through the ballot. It'll go through each candidate, and then you mark it on the screen. And what the machine then does is, all it does is mark the ballot. So it then prints it out of the BMD, and you then bring that ballot to a scanner to be cast. So I'm not sure what you mean by.
Well, I thought that and at least the machines that I work on, the BMD prints the ballot off a blank piece of paper. So how does in early voting, when you have several different districts, how does it get identified that, or what district and what ballots you should be, whatever?
Yeah, so that's with the Dominion, certain Dominion machines, they have the blank ballot. And from what I understand, the poll worker has to put in a code depending on where the voter is registered to vote, and then it somehow puts it on the ballot. I'm much more familiar with the AutoMark because that's in my county, but.
Well, the way it worked last year was that we printed out the ballot for the person, the appropriate ballot. But if with the BMD that prints it out itself, I'm just not sure how that, how would it know what to vote for, what ballot to use?
Right. Yeah. And like I said, I think, and this is again, I think they put in a code into the machine based on where the voter is registered. So all of that is pulled up, but that would be an interesting thing to learn more about.
Yeah, I think I'm going to talk to my Board of Elections tomorrow.
Hey, Sarah, ask, you have a good, Sarah's from Broome, Tioga County. She covers both counties. Okay. Sarah, you guys have a pretty good relationship, I believe, with your Board of Elections down there. Ask that question, and then if you would share it with everyone else, because so many counties use that machine that you're talking about. I'm with Helen. I didn't realize that. The other one, you get the specific ballot that gets put in for your, whatever you're to vote on. So if you would please, we can also search out the answer, but Sarah, if you can get the answer and share it with all of us, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. And I see that it's 8 and Kevin's unmuted. Kevin, I don't know if you have anything to add, or if you need to leave.
I was using, I running one to an early voting. I had someone assist me with a voting process.
Gotcha. Who helped you out?
We the Board of Elections, as well as we have 15 early voting sites per county, right? A few per county for early voting. The Board of Elections people are.
Right. And what ballot marking device is at your polling place? Is it the AutoMark or the Dominion?
It's the AutoMark.
Okay, so.
It's Nassau County.
Yeah, Nassau County. So he's got the same one as us, Laura.
Okay. Well, yes, I don't want to keep people. I will tell you all that, well, first, thank you so much to Helen and Kevin for presenting this information. Also, Michelle for adding from the Long Island viewpoint. We greatly appreciate this. This is the very beginning, guys, of this conversation. We are going to continue working on this. We have recorded tonight's Zoom meeting, so we will have that available to everyone. Helen, if you would provide us with the PowerPoint, that would be great, and any other resources. And Michelle, if you have resources that you'd like to share with this group, that would be great. And as I said, guys, watch for more information because there will be financial incentives for each of the local leagues to work with organizations serving disability communities in your community and helping to educate those people and make them feel more comfortable to be able to vote either, you know, on the BMDs or regular, however they want to vote so that they are not disenfranchised. So just continue to watch for more information, but I greatly appreciate everyone who joined us tonight. I think it was a great session. And again, thank you, Helen and Kevin. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you for having us. And Kevin, thank you so much for your contribution as well.
Thank you.
Yes, everyone stay well.
Thanks, guys. Have a great
Thank
night.
you. Thank
Bye,
you very
guys.
much. Good night.